Hey entrepreneurs, isn't Amazon just a unicorn in and of itself? And have you ever wondered, how does Amazon do it? What are the principles that they follow as an organization that have allowed them to have the explosive growth they have and just command the marketplace? Well, we have a treat in store for you today. We're hearing from John Rossman, who was part of the launch of the marketplace business at Amazon. He's an author of 3 books that center around how Amazon has done business, and he is a consultant and coach and keynote speaker as a result of his experience there. You're going to love what you hear from John, including some of the tips from his books that are immediately actionable by every entrepreneur listening, and I promise it'll make a difference.
John, thanks for joining us here on the Entrepreneurs United podcast. Excited to learn a little bit more about yourself, what Rossman Partners is doing today, and a lot about efficiency, effectiveness, agility in today's world where the digital age is coming real fast, innovation is coming real fast, and you seem to be a sector expert in that area. So can you please tell us, Rich and I and our audience, a little bit more about your background, I guess more historically, where you've come before starting Rossman Partners a few years ago?
Great. Well, thank you for inviting me to be on and to talk to you and your audience. I'm John Rossman. A long time ago, I was a leader at Amazon. So I had the opportunity to lead the launch and scaling of the marketplace business. We started that in 2002. I was at Amazon for almost 4 years. I also ran the enterprise services business at Amazon. That's where we had large enterprises like Toys R Us, Target.com, Marks and Spencer in the UK, Sears Canada, where we ran their e-commerce infrastructure for them. I left Amazon in late 2005, and I was a partner at a management consulting firm for about 12 years, and about 6 or 7 years into that, so 2011, 2012, one of my clients at the Gates Foundation pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you do a really nice job of taking the little insights, the little techniques, strategies from Amazon and inserting them delicately into our work. I think you ought to write a book about this." And so the smartest thing I did was talk him into being my partner on these books. And so we've done 3 books. One of the books we've done 3 times. We've got 3 editions of The Amazon Way, Amazon's leadership principles. And I just think Amazon is the most interesting company of the digital era. And I've really just become a student now at this point. I was inside, but now I'm a student. And I think they're the most interesting company of the digital era. And it's partially because of what they do, but it's more because of how they do it. And I think we can all learn some things from them and question ourselves about, well, how do we think about that topic or that approach or whatnot. And so today I run a small firm, Rossman Partners. We help companies with dealing with complexity and tackling kind of management's most important issues, especially relative to kind of innovation and new business models and digital transformation. And I do a bunch of keynote speaking, and it's great to be here.
Awesome. I love that. So I know one of my favorite books of all time was, I believe it's called The Google Way or something similar to that. But yet, you're right. You think about Amazon and what started off as a bookstore, back, a little bit before 2002. It wasn't that much longer before 2002 that this was basically an online bookstore, is now one of the largest companies in the world. And, I was even talking to someone the other day, John, that, their whole business is acquiring third-party companies that sell on Amazon. And they have 100 people in their M&A department. I was like, holy cow, this is ridiculous how much commerce is being generated off this business. So, wow, I can't wait to dive into that.
Well, that business, that's the marketplace business that your acquaintance is operating in. There's over 2 million sellers now in the marketplace. I was reading that the total GMV, so the total revenue that runs through the marketplace business today, is over $350 billion, which would make it the 35th largest country gross domestic product in the world.
Wow, that's
And
crazy.
so it's an ecosystem at this point. It influences international, trade, and it really is the big dog relative to retail and marketplaces, and it's still growing at 30 to 40% a year at that size. And so it makes retail a really competitive industry if you want to not solely leverage the marketplace business.
Yeah, understood. And help me understand this, because I don't know if I know the answer to this. I know that Amazon is in Canada and the United States because I have relatives in Canada, but and I know it's not in China, right? Or is it? I mean, how far is the retail business?
That's a great question. It depends on what you mean by in China. So they were in China. They did an acquisition in China. That may have wrapped up in the past couple of years, but as a sourcer and supplier, they are all in China. So many of these third-party sellers are in China. And AWS is in China, and so Amazon is in China. I should know the answer to that. Like, is there a retail Amazon site today in China? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, and I mean, AWS, it's a whole different conversation and how massive that is. And a lot of people just don't understand that Amazon basically powers most servers across the globe for most companies, probably including Google. So that's just amazing.
Not Google, actually.
Not Google. Okay, no. All right, but all the other ones.
Many others.
So I have to dive right here. I mean, well, first off, before I go there, what were the two other books? So one book was Amazon Way. What was the title of the two other books?
Yeah, so the Amazon Way was the first one. Mm-hmm. The second was called The Amazon Way on IoT, 10 Principles for Every Business Leader on the Internet of Things. And it's a business book written, I wrote it from a client engagement where we're building a digital strategy focused on the Internet of Things. And what I couldn't find was a holistic, durable way to think through, well, how could the Internet of Things be useful for my business? So I wrote it for a business person to help them think through how IoT could impact their business, leveraging the approaches and how Amazon would do it. So that's the Amazon Way on IoT. And then I wrote a book called Think Like Amazon, 50 and a half Ideas to Become a Digital Leader, released that in 2019. That is all of the mechanisms from Amazon. So kind of the Amazon Way and Think Like Amazon are companion books. The Amazon Way is a lighter weight read. You can read it on one plane ride with a glass of wine. It's kind of my story at Amazon and the leadership principles, and starts you down the path of like, hey, here's a bunch of tools and approaches. Think Like Amazon. Think of that as like, that's the full offensive playbook. And each idea is laid out as a discrete, independent item. And I lean on that book all the time in my client work. Like, oh, let's look at idea 44 or 24 or something like that. And so they're nice companion books. I also write a newsletter called the Digital Leader Newsletter. It's on Substack. You can subscribe for free. I write beyond Amazon on my newsletter, but it's a newsletter, a weekly little trick for innovators and change agents to help make change happen.
So, John, our episodes usually last somewhere between 45 minutes to an hour. But Rich, I'm thinking today we should just go for a marathon episode and go through all 50 ways to think like Amazon, one by one. What do you think?
I think so. We should go for 4 or 5 hours here and just see how many survivors we have at the end.
I mean, that must be a tremendous amount of...
For those that are not watching on YouTube, John just walked off screen. Our guest just walked off screen and abandoned us while we were talking about the idea of going 4 or 5 hours.
I had to get ready. Yeah, I had to buckle
up. I'm curious, John, you'd said the Amazon Way that has become foundational to your consulting practice, and you referenced, sometimes you'll go in and go, hey, number 44, number 50. What are a few of the principles that you lean on most often in your consulting practice that show up in the Amazon way?
Well, there's a few, and it's very situational, right? But certainly, leadership principle number 3 is invent and simplify. And it's the and simplify piece that I think is the trickiest and understated little superpower from Amazon. At Amazon, when you were an operational leader, one of your key objectives was always, how am I going to scale? And scale meant something very specific at Amazon. That meant being able to do more, whatever the whatever the units were in your business. You had to be able to do more units on an improving economic measure, right? And so whether that's orders or clicks or bits or whatever it is, scaling meant you had to be able to do more on an improving unit cost. What happens at most companies is early in their lifespan, they're achieving that, right? They're growing and they're getting more efficient. But pretty quickly, you actually see that efficiency stall out, and to do more, they actually start losing scale, meaning their unit costs either flatten out or actually decrease. And that's because they don't engineer themselves. They don't think through how to make the simplest processes, the simplest procedures, the simplest data flows, the simplest paths, the simplest culture possible in order to scale. And so what we realize that the reason that principle is invent and simplify is because we realize that simplifying was as important and as hard to do as inventing and helping to scale our business, right? And so that's one that is always kind of like, everybody thinks like, we're going to talk about invention or whatever. It's like, no, man, we're going to talk about how to knock out complexity in your business, how to understand the true costs of that, and be a forcing function for addressing the topics and the issues and the uncomfortable notions of like, hey, if we're really going to get to simplicity, we have to fight through kind of these issues. So that's one. There's a leadership principle called our right a lot. And, that one is about like, leaders have to understand the details of their business and make good decisions. One of the ways you do that is through the metrics that you have in your business. And I'm an industrial engineer by background. When I went into Amazon, I thought I knew how to use metrics to evaluate and make change happen. And it's like Amazon took me to the master's level course on that. And if there's one distinct thing I remember about the days at corporate Amazon, it was the routine of going to metrics meetings and leaders understanding their metrics. We always designed our metrics to feature the problems, not to feature the good news. And I think that's a distinct orientation, is you have to design your metrics to feature the signals and where the problems are and where there's customer dissatisfaction. And then understanding the true root cause of what's behind those metrics, and then debate how and when and on what rationale to take action, right? And so, I always talk about make metrics a verb. We have metrics to learn and we have metrics to improve. We have to take action. And that's actually quite different than how most cultures are set up. Most cultures are set up to have metrics that tell us basically that we're doing a good job. Everybody gets defensive when you start talking about problems, because like for some reason that's a negative thing. We're there to make improvements, right? And most companies like aren't really interested in digging into root cause and making deeper, substantial changes. And when you focus on a routine set of metrics like that and really looking for root cause, one of the things that does is it helps set you up for the bigger ideas. Like that's where you get inspiration, is from your metrics, because your metrics, if you do them right, really represent the customer experience and your operational efficiency. And so that's listening to your business through your metrics gives you insights for ways you can serve your customers bigger and broader than the way you serve them today, and how to drive scale and operational improvements. And then maybe the last one I'll mention is the leadership principle about bias for action. And it's that just recognizing that speed in business matters, and that there's one of the ways companies slow down is through their decision-making processes. Amazon has a pretty simple approach, like recognizing that speed is important. They talk about one-way door decisions versus two-way door decisions. A one-way door decision is a decision that's impossible or nearly impossible to reverse. What do we need to do with one-way door decisions? We need to slow down. We need to debate them thoroughly. We need to debate them calmly. A two-way door decision is actually one that we can make, we can test, and we can reverse it. And if you just recognize that there are one-way door situations and two-way door situations, and the real secret to this is how to look at what appears to be a one-way door situation, and is there a way that I can break it down into smaller, testable components? That's the agile mindset, right? Of test and learn, and break it into a series of two-way door decisions. But just overall, like trying to fight, and this is a bigger company issue, but just fighting bureaucracy, slowing down, and encouraging healthy debate when we're having the debate about the issue. And then the 13th leadership principle is about disagree but commit. And that's how we discuss things, right? We vigorously debate topics. We lead with customer, we lead with data. But when the decision maker makes a decision, we all wholeheartedly work to make that decision successful. So those are some of the things, depending upon the situation, that I'm always kind of grabbing towards. There's a bunch of others, but those are a few to start off the conversation.
Yeah, that's helpful. I want to clarify the second one you said, is that our right a lot?
Yes, sir.
And is that RIGHT or WRITE?
It could be either, but it's ARE. Right, comma, a lot. And it basically says, like, leaders have to have good judgment and understand the details of the business. Well, how do you do that? It's by studying your business through your metrics.
So it's like our right, like it's our right to. Got
it. ARE space right. They have good judgment is what that means. They are right a lot.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying. The first one you went through, the invent and simplify, I particularly find interesting, and I think some of our listeners may as well. If you had a continuum of making things too complex or making things too simple, I am definitely on the making things too complex side. I know that about myself, and I try to work to simplify, knowing that my default is to make things thorough, which may make things complex. What's the simplified way for me to think about how to simplify? Like, what are the rules of simplification when I take an idea or a thought or an innovation? What are the filters I need to run that through that will consistently yield simple?
I think it was Mark Twain that said, I didn't have the time to write a short letter, so I wrote you a long letter instead, right? And so the habit of writing out your concepts and working to make those as direct, obvious, the attribute you're seeking is clarity. Clarity is a function of both completeness of thought and simpleness of communication. It's, as you were pointing out, it's relatively easy to write it out long or to talk about it long. It's a real skill to be able to take a complex topic and talk about it in a simple manner. So Amazon has this culture of writing. And so whether it's, when we're doing a correction of error, like what happened and explaining the situation, or a proposal, a project, like, hey, we want to do something new, they write those things out. And there's a set of techniques I go through in the book around narratives, feature press releases, FAQs. The core underneath them all is about clarity of communication is kind of the first goal, right? But by forcing us to write them out, then others can contribute to that. You can debate it and you can move it forward kind of as the idea gains clarity and gains agreement, and choices are made relative to that. It's not a static conversation, but the documents help to capture that. Then one of the great things you can do if you have a well-written document about a situation, a proposal, what you're going to do in the future, you can audit against that, right? So now I have the ability to recall exactly what we said we were going to do, or what our hypotheses were, and test against that. And so, writing is an absolute superpower. Bezos talks about this in one of his shareholder letters, and one of the recommendations I would make is read the Amazon shareholder letters, like essentially 27 of them now. They are fantastic. And in one of the shareholder letters, Bezos talks about this curious culture of writing, and that it's hard, but you can learn it. And he equates it to learning how to do a perfect handstand. You can learn how to do a perfect handstand. Probably takes you about 6 months. It's helpful to get a coach to help give you feedback and coaching on it, and everything, but you can learn to do it. And writing, I think, for clarity of thought on more complex topics is the superpower that is really helps differentiate and bring others along with you.
Yeah, so I did very nice expansion on that. So the writing is to force clarity of thought by the innovator. It allows collaboration from others. You didn't say this, but I know based on the conversation so far, it allows it to scale because it's something that can be passed along to many people. And it, at the end, allows you to audit action against what was intended. And not that the action needs to follow it exclusively, but if there are things that were deviated, did they work? Why not? And have a writing on that to be able to crystallize the learning.
Exactly that point. So that you learn, and it helps. It's a kind of an accountability forcing tool. And the curious thing about Amazon meetings, when we have a meeting to evaluate a situation represented by a paper, meetings start with 15 to 20 minutes of silence when people read these documents, and then conversation ensues, right? So it forces. It's not just a forcing function for the writer or writers of the document. It's also a forcing function for the people that are participating in the review of it, because they have to grok this document, deeply understand this document. And so it's a better preparation tool for them to be able to give appropriate feedback to a complex situation.
Interesting. So meetings start. If there's somebody who wrote something on an innovation, the meeting starts with reading it silence for 15, 20 minutes. That's done in the meeting in the Amazon way. That is not done as preparation for the meeting. Why is that taking meeting time to do something that could be done individually?
What's your experience in the success rate of sending out a pre-read to a group of people, and that everybody actually does their homework before coming to class?
Hold on. Let's both think about that one, Rich, to see if we come close to the same response.
What the success rate is?
Yeah, how many people will do the actual proper prep before the meeting on a percentage basis?
Well, and I'm going to go at mass scale versus with a leadership team.
Sure.
So yeah, I have a percentage in mind.
All right. I'll say 25 at most.
I was going to go with 30.
Okay.
And I get it. So in the idea,
and that's why we read them. That's why you read them in a meeting, right? Because it like assume people haven't done their homework. It's going to be a better conversation, and people are going to be better equipped. Now, it's always great if people think through things multiple times, but especially, executives tend to get busy. If we're briefing on a situation, let's just take the time in that meeting to read it. But that also that forces the document. It has to be tight. It has to have clarity. It has to be simple, right? So that somebody in 15 minutes can actually get the whole the concept and what you're asking at this point in time, right? So a narrative document is written to a specific purpose. Like, I'm informing somebody or a group of people about something, so I have to both explain it and I have to be clear about, like, well, what's the question that's in front of us right now, right? Is it just educational, or is it like, hey, it's commitment time, or we're debriefing on results? Like, you have to write it for a specific purpose.
And I think too, Rich, from my experience, what ends up happening is without the writing and without the silence to reading it, you have a meeting to talk about an idea, and then the outcome of the meeting after an hour is, okay, go research it and put it together and come back. And then you come back, and then people don't do their homework and read it, and you get in this vicious cycle of waste, which is interesting because, I've been thinking about the same question you had, which is, well, hey, that's taking more time than the meeting. Now, instead of your meeting being 30 minutes, it's maybe an hour, but the meeting seems complete. And the concept is complete at that stage because of the writing.
And I feel like the concept of preparation in the world of utopia, where everything works out and everybody does what is optimal, doing it before the meeting is a no-brainer. But in the world of reality, are people going to give it 15, 20 minutes of silent time reading and focusing when they're on their own, while an email is coming in, while a text message just came in, while there's a fire burning somewhere in their business? Reality is probably not. Last question for me, and I know, John, I'm sure you have follow-up questions on a few things, so I apologize. Last question for me in closure of this topic on writing. Is there a formula, or in your book, The Amazon Way, are there sections that are recommended that need to be included to have a crafted writing that results in clarity? And okay.
Yeah, so I do break down each type of the documents, like the narratives, the future press releases, the FAQs and whatnot. But on the narratives, there actually isn't a structure, because there isn't a set structure, because it's very dependent upon, well, what's the topic at hand, right? Is it your business plan for the year? Is it a new innovation idea? Is it a correction of error situation? And even if we were to say, like, oh, it's an innovative idea, well, where are we at relative to that concept, right? And so there isn't at Amazon, but I've worked with so many companies on this. I understand how valuable it is to have kind of a table of contents and some guidelines as a starting toolkit and stuff. So I've developed some tools like that to help teams that I work with. One of the things I love about this habit of writing is it scales. You can do it as just an individual professional, and your thinking will be better. Your ability to explain things will be better. You can do it as a team. You can do it as a business unit. You can do it just on this one topic, right? And so you don't have to go all in to start this process. You do need to explain it to others. And that's why I think having a book like this is helpful. Like, hey, this is why we're doing this, and everything. But you don't have to go all in to start this habit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think even you mentioned something very key there. Even if you're doing it for yourself, and this is something I learned from one of our former guests, Dr. Julie Bell, is write for 20 minutes every day. And as I do that, my thought processes start coming out. It's like, yeah, you know what? That took 20 minutes of my day that maybe I could have been answering emails or doing text messages, but the value I get from just thinking, writing, laying out my entire thought process. I love that quote from Mark Twain as well, right? Didn't have enough time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one just to make it clear and tight and concise. So I love that. I just want to recap here just for a second. Number 3 is invent and simplify.
Yes, sir.
R write a lot is what number?
Number 4.
Number 4. Okay, got it. And then there was one about bias for action.
Yep.
What was that?
Number 9.
And then I had disagree but commit. Number 13.
Number 13.
Is there one around writing that's a number?
No, because that's a mechanism, right?
Got it.
And so understand the difference between kind of a principle, like hey, here's the general concept or what goodness looks like. And then there's practices, like how do we accomplish that, right? And sometimes practices or mechanisms go across, help support multiple principles.
Okay.
So like the first leadership principle is customer obsession, right? It's probably the most famous at Amazon, but it is just, one of the set. That principle, like, hey, there's all sorts of ways that we bring customer obsession to life in our business, but the principle is about always putting the customer at the center of everything we do, and that we work to build trust and deep insights in them. That's the principle. How we do it, there's lots of little ways we do that.
Okay, got it. And is there a principle around the meeting concept you articulate, or is that just more a philosophy?
A practice and a philosophy relative to that. And it really supports a number of the principles around our right a lot. There's a principle called dive deep, which is similar to our right a lot. Actually, there's a principle, the 14th leadership principle is called deliver results. That principle definitely drives kind of meeting behavior and stuff. And so there is not a principle about meetings.
Got it. What's dive deep, by the way, out of curiosity?
Oh yeah, that is number 12.
Sorry, I'm testing the your just memory of what number these all are, but I'm just curious. So I want to hit back on bias for action now that I kind of get a few of these, because I'm wondering, I love what you talked about in terms of, speed in business matters, one door decision, two door decisions. Wow. This one, hit me pretty hard, where I made a fairly quick one doorway decision, and it was extremely costly. Basically lost the company, right? Lost my job, lost the company. I mean, the one door decision, right? And a lot of entrepreneurs, when you think about that one door versus two door, what you said about it that I loved was not only going careful and slow, because I think that's the part of my learning was, okay, go slower next time. But I also loved about it was make it in smaller, digestible pieces so that we can pilot test as more of a two-way door decision, see how it works, and then make the call. I think that really applies to, all entrepreneurs, all businesses, all the time. But sometimes it's hard. You want to go so fast. You want to grow so quick. So how did that, this may fit as well to the, not being defensive, and somebody thinks this decision is the right one, that one's not. And you talked about this, and the metrics are in the R right a lot, is, have healthy debate. How was that handled at Amazon when you thought we should make this decision? I thought we should make this decision, or, there was a debate around the metrics. How was conflict handled at Amazon?
Well, I would say to some degree, it was encouraged if it's based on like doing the right thing for the business, right? And so there's kind of, I'm not an expert on this topic, but I'm kind of guessing there's kind of like debating the situation, conflict on what happened versus like some sort of personal conflict, or something like that, right? And so, and having data and leading with customer obsession, that just helps us to have healthier, conflict in those conversations. One of the things that you noticed at Amazon was, so there's a leadership principle kind of relative to this. It's called earn trust, and it reads, leaders listen attentively, speak candidly, and treat others respectfully. They are vocally self-critical. Even when doing so is awkward or embarrassing. So a good leader, one of the ways that you encourage healthy debate and conflict is by saying, well, here's my problem, part of this situation, assuming it's a fairly complex situation, which most situations are, right? Yeah. Or it just gets dealt with, right? If we're having a meet about something, naturally it's a complex situation. But a good leader starts with, well, here's the details of what happened, and here's what I did or my team did, what we should have done better, what the root cause is, or something like that. And so I remember routinely hearing people at Amazon, they would start with like, well, my team sucked this week. Here's what happened, and everything, and here's what we're doing about it. And so when you open the kimono and lead with that, guess what? That makes it a safe environment for everybody to go, yeah, this was my part of this problem, and everything, right? Like, here's something we should have done better. And so being self-critical is such a healthy thing to do. That's how you grow, and everything, right? Like, what was the movie? Whiplash. Do you guys remember that movie? It was several years ago, won an Academy Award. It was about this world-class young drummer and his abusive teacher. And one of the closing lines was the teacher trying to rationalize like why he had been so abusive and everything. But he goes, nobody ever. The two most damaging words in the English language are "good job," and everything, right? And the lesson behind that is you don't learn by patting yourself on the back. You learn by being critical about a situation and thinking deep on it and asking, what can we do to improve?
John, where's the line between that and propagating a negative culture? That all we focus on are problems and failures, and we don't acknowledge, like, I can see that in its extreme form being a real drag on looking forward to coming to work.
Like any good thing taken to any extreme, it can be a negative thing. So yeah, you do need to find the moments to recognize accomplishments and recognizing success. But if what we typically do is just tout what we did well versus like what we didn't do well. But I think the most damaging thing that can seep in here is sarcasm, right? Sarcasm is what, in my experience, and this has nothing to do with Amazon at all, but in my experience, is when you become sarcastic in those conversations, that's when the real poison starts in a meeting and in a team.
I would agree. I mean, that there's no doubt that when sarcasm starts jumping in and people are all over each other from that perspective versus the respect. And, I love, when you think about this whole KPI side of things, you're right. In most organizations, the leaders are like, let's put together these KPIs because these are the ones that make us look good. And let's go to the meeting and share them. And then what ends up happening is somebody who knows a little bit more is like, well, wait a minute, what about this KPI? And they're like, well, yeah. and then they feel like they're on the defensive because they didn't have that prepared versus you coming to the meeting with, you know what, here are two KPIs we did really good with, but here are two KPIs we really sucked at. And here's what we tried. You guys have any advice for us? Like, it's a whole different dynamic. And I'd love to give this story, John, that happened to me once. It was in the 3PL industry, and we had a meeting with the customer, and we just really hadn't performed well. And the team was working through like, how are we going to present our QBR, our quarterly business review, to this customer because we sucked, and they were trying to put together all these metrics that made them look good. And we talked about, I don't know if you've seen, speaking of movies, have you ever seen 9 Mile, the Eminem movie?
I have seen, yeah, okay. 8 Mile.
8 Mile, excuse me.
Yeah. You added a mile to the movie here.
Yeah. You always go the 9th mile.
It was so good, I added a mile. But in the 8 Mile movie, when he got to the end and he was in this rap contest against this other contestant, he was going first. And what he decided to do was take away his opponent's complete speech. So Eminem went on and he talked about his mom and her drug problems and the fact that he didn't have a job and he lost his girlfriend or whatever he talked about. And he did such a good job that when the opponent came on, the opponent had nothing else to say. And it ruined his whole rap. And he, right. And he won obviously this contest. Well, as a leader, if you can come into a meeting and be like, look, here's where I've really sucked, or our team has really sucked, and I'm owning it, but help me. This is why we're having this meeting, is to share ideas and so we can get better at it. Wow, that self-critical ownership really takes anybody else who would ever try and attack you, just their defenses go completely down. They're like, okay, they get it, and it just changes the dynamic.
And it puts you into a problem-solving mindset versus I have to prove to this person that it's not, it wasn't good, right? Because that's typically what happens to me like that is like one side's trying to spin it as a positive and the other's going, no, man, like here's where's all these problems. Well, then you have low trust and you're kind of trying to attack in one way the other side versus like, hey, here's the balanced and fair facts of the situation,
Mm-hmm.
then you turn it into problem solving. And that's how trust and partnership is built. Now, you do have to make progress on those things, right? Like you have to take that meeting and take it down to root cause, into actions, and proceed on those actions. And everything, right? But if that's the wash, rinse, repeat, improve cycle, that a really healthy environment, that's operational excellence at its core. That's the healthy cycle that we want.
Yeah, I love that, John. You can see that I'm obsessed by these 50, so I'm gonna have to get the book so I can get every single one of them down. And Rich had asked you, which are the ones that you use most commonly with the entrepreneurs that you work with or the businesses you work with? I want to ask you a little bit of a different question. Like when you say number one, customer obsession, okay, get it. You don't have to talk more about it. I think I know what that means. And you can go through a few of these, but when you say, are right a lot, I'm like, oh my gosh, what's this one? What would be one of the principles that we didn't cover so far that is so unique to Amazon that you've never really seen anywhere else? Is there one that pops out?
Well, we kind of mentioned this, but the principle of have the backbone, disagree, and commit. And I'll read the whole principle to you. It says leaders are obligated to respectfully challenge decisions when they disagree, even when doing so is uncomfortable or exhausting. Leaders have conviction and are tenacious. They do not compromise for the sake of social cohesion. Once a decision is determined, they wholly commit. That principle is loaded with little things that you need to consider there. But that notion of social cohesion is an important line. Like what happens in most companies? Like, well, we're friends, we're colleagues, we need to be respectful, and that becomes hard to make it easy for me to hold you accountable, right? That's what social cohesion says. Is like, hey, we're going to kind of relax our standards because we want to get along. And this just helps recognize, like, hey, that's going on. So find ways to hold each other accountable. One of the little ways that's led to some really big businesses at Amazon of doing that is when you build a tool or a capability, internal customers for that tool, you're going to have more social cohesion because we're teammates. They're going to be less demanding customers. Take a tool, take a capability that's an internal tool, turn it inside out, have external customers to it, because external customers are always demanding. They're always going to tell you what's on their mind, right? So Amazon has figured this out to a scale of like, hey, one of the ways to get critical feedback, to not always be critical of our own capability, is to take tools, turn them inside out, have external users, external developers using these. That's how we're going to get critical feedback, and it helps avoid social cohesion.
Yeah, I love that. And Rich, over the past month or two, you've asked a few of our guests how would you define emotional intelligence? How would you define strategy? One of the things that John mentioned earlier that I just want to come back to before we move on from this topic is you define scale in a way that I loved. Do more on an improving economic measure. That was pretty elegant in terms of how to describe scale. So I love that. If I move off of this, and I'm going to go into no man's land here just for a second, because I'm just curious. I have a hypothesis that's out in left field that I've heard some people talk about related to Amazon, that Amazon is going to come up with their own cryptocurrency, maybe the AMZ coin, because the one way, if you look at Amazon in terms of improving and scaling and simplifying, is that everybody pays for their goods on Amazon with a credit card. And Visa, American Express, Discover, whatever, that costs Amazon 2.5%, maybe is their rate, 3%. At, worst case, that's billions and billions of dollars. Yet they're trying to scrape, pennies off the toothbrush. Do you believe that's coming in the future?
I do. In fact, I've been. I don't know if it's their own coin or just the use of cryptocurrency, but I do believe that Amazon will enable crypto. I think it'll be a big turning moment for the entire ecosystem. There have been some job postings at Amazon that hint at this, and I am a little surprised at they're not clearly a leader at this point.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? Because if you think I'm sure that everybody's thinking the same thing in that regard. But it's just going to be amazing if and when that does happen. The I don't know the savings that they would have in the billions and billions of dollars, but then what that means to that whole crypto space and environment when it has that much mass adoption. So just a wild and question out there in left field. So I appreciate you answering that.
Good question.
So right now, let's move to your current business specifically today. So what kind of entrepreneurs do you work with today? Do you do coaching of individual entrepreneurs, or do you do strategic consulting for companies? What exactly do you do today as a practice beyond speaking in your books?
Yeah, so my advisory work, where I work with a company or a leader over a longer period of time, kind of sometimes it's as an advisory board member, whatnot, that tends to be smaller and mid-sized businesses, and it's typically about strategy. The consulting work where we run projects tends to be with bigger companies, as I mentioned, oftentimes kind of tackling complexity at its core, helping to achieve scale, and thinking through digital transformation and real use cases to create value from digital transformation. Those are kind of the two categories that I work with. One tends to be with smaller companies, and I have a ton of flexibility in how I work there. And then one tends to be bigger companies in consulting projects.
When you say you work on strategy, can you dig in there a bit?
Yeah, I mean, specifically thinking through both, how are we going to win? What's the superpower we're going to give to a customer, as well as thinking through like what's the theory of change? Like how does adoption happen? Is typically the you can envision the future state of like, oh, you've got this flywheel spinning, but like what do we do to actually create that momentum? And so strategy is the process of deliberately saying yes to a few things and no to a whole bunch of really good ideas, right? And it's that saying no to a bunch of really good ideas is, I think, the hardest and most important part of strategy, and staying true and deliberate to like, okay, this is the specific theory that we have about the user, the market, and what's going to gain adoption, and then helping to just stay true to that specific point of view until we've tested it and it's time to learn and adjust. But you don't do that casually. You do that, very deliberately.
Thank you for that. One of the things you made me think of when you said, how does adoption happen? Is I look at our system within CertaPro painters and look at, there are times where we struggle with adoption. And one of the things that we struggle with adoption is communication. You send an email, not everybody reads it. Not everybody wants a text message. They'll hit block. Not everybody goes to the intranet in order to see what the latest news is that they should be up to speed on. So that's a real challenge, I think, not just for our company, but for a lot of companies. What lessons do you have to offer about communication and adoption internally that maybe you learned from Amazon?
One of Bezos' real superpowers is his staying on point over a long period of time. And these principles are part of the way that he has stayed on point over a long period of time. And so he is, that there's this concept of a CRO, a chief repeating officer, right? And a chief repeating officer just they say the select critical important element time and time and time again. So it kind of comes back to simplicity a little bit, which is staying on point. And so you really have to pick your points up front really, really carefully, because you don't want to be changing them a whole lot. And so consistency and simplicity of that point, making it, like a good example from Amazon is Bezos always talked about, like, it's day one here at Amazon, right? It's not one of their leadership principles, but it is kind of a default mantra at Amazon. And it just says, like, we are willing to take risks. We are always going to be leaning forward in exploring and inventing, and we understand that sometimes that's inefficient because you're trying to be an inventor, and it's just an optimistic attitude for the organization. Well, he's been talking about day one for 20 years now, and everything, right? That is an example of very strategic communication that over time makes a tremendous impact in the organization.
Great example. Thank you for that. In conclusion of our conversation, which has been excellent, what would be something that you either want to double down on that we talked about that you feel all entrepreneurs as listeners should really hear? Or what would be a concept that we haven't hit that you feel would be of value for them to hear now?
Well, I think, the one that we've talked about, we've hit a couple times, but I think writing is a real superpower to clarity of thought and bringing that to others. And so just in whatever fashion, you write out your concepts and make them super direct, super simple, that will help you make better decisions and communicate them to others. And, there's a quote that, communication isn't for the sender, it's for the receiver, right? Like you have to understand, like your goal in communicating is getting it understood by other people. And that I think we oftentimes overlook, like we put the burden on the receiver, and it's the sender's obligation to make communication great.
Thank you, John. Much appreciate your time today.
You bet.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
John, the takeaways that I got around the importance of writing concepts out. It's so, talk about simple. And that was one of the themes that came up with John, our guest. But talk about simple. Like, man, I almost feel silly for not writing more stuff out or asking other people to write more stuff out. When he describes that, it is so simple, stupid. Clarity by the writer allows for collaboration of others. It allows scalability of that concept, and you can audit afterwards against the action on it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's simple, stupid, Rich. I think it's hard. I think it's laborious. I think it's difficult because people don't have the discipline. They're putting out fires. I don't have time to write out. You guys should just be able to understand what I'm saying to you right now, and we should be able to go ahead and move forward and do it. What I think Bezos has done with Amazon that John clearly articulates is the discipline. And once that discipline is enforced, you would feel like a complete idiot if you went to a meeting with these people and didn't have it properly all written out and reviewed maybe by a peer friend or coach or whatever. You would just feel completely embarrassed that you were ill prepared for that meeting.
And you just sat there and did a 10-minute monologue about this idea you had and then said, okay, let's do a Q&A session. They'd be like, what? Are you kidding me?
Exactly. It's the discipline that you're willing to accept in your company. Like, I'll give you a good example, right? I'd love to have Cameron Harold on this conversation and have a debate about meetings suck, right? Compared to, for the first 15, 20 minutes of the meeting, you're just going to read, and then we're going to have the meeting, and the meeting's actually an hour and a half long versus, the no meeting climate, right? It's a completely different perspective, different philosophies. I think the reason why it's not done in companies is just the discipline. It's a lot of work. It's tough. It's hard for the leaders to enforce it. It's hard for the people to actually do it. A lot of people claim, well, I'm not a good writer. I mean, you could have so many different issues come around it. But if you can create that culture, wow, now I get it.
Yeah. I appreciate the pushback on the simple, stupid. I would only double down on simple, not easy. The idea of, hey, can you put that in writing? That's super simple. How long did that take me? It took like 5 seconds. But yes, the request of somebody else and actually following through on that, not easy, and not easy to embed that culture of the value of even clarifying thoughts in writing. I think, I experience a lot of people who would prefer not to clarify thoughts in writing because there may be risk associated to it. You are actually owning, here's what I say, here's what I think. And it reduces a collaborative process where you can contradict yourself to actually have something in writing. I agree with you. It's not simple stupid in its execution. And then to go to when I pushed back on our guest on, hey, how come you don't do that as prep? I mean, what a beautiful, I mean, just the reality of, and what I wrote down, my takeaway was, hey, prep really isn't going to happen at the level you want it to for a meeting or for a training. I would, however, encourage our coaches, when you do one-on-one coaching, there should be prep on behalf of the learner. And that's one-on-one. And it's so learner driven that I bet that person for the coaching event is going to do the prep. But when it's one to many and it's a training or a meeting, probably not going to happen. You should open up the space as our guest John suggested.
Yeah, but even in that environment, Rich, in a coachee relationship, if the coach doesn't have an expectation of discipline that the coachee is going to come prepared and hold them accountable to that, it doesn't happen. There's a lot of coaching relationships. I'm in some of them right now where I don't really reinforce their prep, and therefore they come ill prepared, and I accept it. And so it really is the culture you're creating.
Got soft, John. I don't remember working with you that way in 25 years. Did you get soft?
I did. But you know what? As far as I'm concerned, right? It's the discipline that you want to create in your organization or in your relationship, and that varies. It could be very strict in your organization that this is what you do, and if not, the call's canceled, and I'm not going to coach you anymore, or whatever. Like maybe that's what happened in your environment, right? I mean, I'll go back to the Amazon way. You show up in a meeting and you're ill prepared. You don't have anything written out. The meeting's over. The meeting's probably canceled the day before because you're that embarrassed. Hey, I'm not ready for this meeting. And so I love the discipline, and each entrepreneur needs to decide what discipline they want. What clarity do they want in their organization? And what I loved about what Bezos has done, but what John has articulated here is, look, these 50 principles that are in my book, they haven't changed. Like they've been the same for 20 years. The consistency of the chief repeating officer, just repeating stuff over and over and over again. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're doing it. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're doing it. If you weren't able to survive in that culture of these 50 principles, you would leave. And it goes back to that selection process, that magnet. Your processes are going to magnetize people who are willing to write it down, that do want to prepare statements before the meetings. It's going to magnetize who you're actually looking for versus, and also repel those you don't want to have, versus that people in your organization are just going to be ill prepared all the time.
Our guest, John, spoke to what you just brought up from the episode. He spoke to that as a superpower. Like Jeff Bezos' superpower is to stay on point over a long period of time. I think there are an awful lot of leaders that, and me included, that can easily fall into a trap of feeling like, well, I said that, it should have been heard, and I'm ready to move on. And staying on the same point, there's a concern about being overly repetitive, boring, redundant, not hearing something new. And then there's the kind of the new shiny object syndrome when it comes to incorporating new business philosophies into the business that doesn't create simplicity and clarity. It creates confusion. So I buy in. It's a superpower to stay on point over a long period of time. If you have the right principle that's enduring, keep reinforcing those right principles.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I can't wait to read all 50 of them. You really want to dig into every single one of them. And I did the same thing. There's a similar book written about the Google way. And some of the principles of Google are different than the ones at Amazon, but they're such a big part of that culture of what you create as an organization that it becomes who you are, and it becomes easy to repeat. Even if Jeff isn't there anymore, it's so cascaded throughout his organization. I love it. The other part that you're talking about, Rich, is Amazon's a unicorn. I mean, the growth that they've had has been unbelievable. But to know that they would look at one-door decisions and two-door decisions, and they would go slower. To think about a company like Amazon going slower is kind of, doesn't really make a lot of sense. But when they do go fast is when they've fully tested something. It's been beta. They made a 2A decision. Let's just try this. And they beta tested. They had the KPIs around it. They beat it to death. Then when they know they have something that really, really works, then they push the accelerator pedal and it goes, right? I think way too many times entrepreneurs, and I've caught myself too many times doing this, is you would make such a big decision without making it smaller bite-sized pieces of the beta test. You'd make such a big decision. You'd be so pot committed to that big decision, you can't get out of it. And it drains you. It drains your energy. It drains your money. It drains so many different components of it. So to hear that a large company like Amazon can go slow and make careful, calculated decisions and beta test things in smaller bites versus always go big or go home, is a lesson I think all entrepreneurs can learn. Patient ambition.